It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast. Yes, every day heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Property prices are surging to new levels according to Domain's July property listings. Now, this is in Melbourne, Adelaide and Canberra, with Sydney seeing its second highest on record when it comes to property listings. Overall, the supply hit new highs in several capitals, including Melbourne, Hobart, Canberra and Sydney. Domain noted that while demand remains strong due to increased investment in first home buyer activity, the rising supply is challenging buyer interest. And this morning we are off to New South Wales, in fact, off to an area we have not spoken about before. And we are talking to Brad Purcell. He's the General Manager of Sales. And Brad, welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast. Nice to have you on. You are in Engadine, which is a suburb in southern Sydney. I believe it is located 33 k's south of Sydney's CBD, and you've got a population that is rising. So tell us a little bit about the area.
Yeah, of course, mate. So Engadine is one of the southwestern suburbs in the Sutherland Shire region in what's locally known as God's Country. It's a region that historically was fairly blue collar, a location that offered significant value proposition for a lot of Sutherland Shire locals, but is quickly changing based on the amount of buyer activity the area's witnessed over the last particularly 3 to 4 years, and the opportunity to secure a very traditional Australian dream type of property, which is, freestanding houses on above average blocks between sort of 600 to 1,000 square metres. But our population is increasing because there's obviously a large amount of additional development taking place in the region as well, including, high density apartments, more contemporary style duplexes, which are obviously being taken advantage of those larger traditional block sizes.
So your population around 18,000 and growing. I just want to come back to the buyer inquiry that you're talking about. Is the buyer inquiry a little bit sort of different to what it has been, because the location perhaps of where they're coming from might be a little bit different? Has that changed?
Yeah, we've noticed a significant increase in out-of-area buyer inquiry, particularly over the last 12 to 18 months. So it's no secret, obviously, that Sydney's median values have increased substantially, effectively since COVID. And the perception for value and the buying public's willingness to or want to be able to secure larger land sizes with freestanding houses means that they've had to drift their search a little further afield than where they would traditionally. So close to 50% of our inquiry are from buyers who are located outside the Sutherland Shire. So that's locations like St George, the inner west of Sydney, parts of the eastern suburbs. Particularly younger families or people who have family planning objectives are looking to move out to this location in order to secure the types of properties that can accommodate their goals.
And let's sort of run over the median values, because, of course, Brad, people will be interested to find out what they are this morning.
Yeah, of course. So our median values are edging close to $1.4 million for a freestanding house and a touch over $800,000 for apartments.
And what is happening with the volume of open homes? Plenty of people turning up on the day?
Yeah, we're still seeing a significant amount of open house attendees. The numbers are starting to decline a little bit in comparison to the peak of the market, let's say 2021 through parts of 2022 and even the beginning of this year. But we're still seeing, in excess of 20, 30, some examples of more than 50 people attending a particular open home across Saturdays. And we're still getting fairly good volumes from our midweek open houses at the same time.
All right, well, this morning we are in Engadine, finding out what is happening there with Brad Purcell. We'll come back after this and talk more.
Why shout from the rooftops on expensive radio and TV when you can whisper straight into the ears of property lovers? Our listeners are all about bricks, mortar and property transactions.
And right now it is time for another 30-second property tip, and we are headed off to Geelong to Julia Warren. Good morning, Julia. What have you got for us this morning?
I wanted to say, certainly not to assume if it's going to pass into you at auction that you've got the ability to wrestle the price. What we've noticed so much over the last couple of months is buyers letting properties pass in and then it turning into an auction after the auction with multiple groups getting amongst it and saying it may as well have just been an auction out on the street, but it turns into a closed door auction. So if you do see a property about to pass in and you do have interest, you just have to make sure you're the highest bidder, because there is very often multiple other groups in the crowd doing the same thing. So I've had it multiple times recently, and then 5 people come up to us and then we're juggling an auction. Don't assume because it passes in that you've got the ability to wrestle on price. It just means that everyone else was just as nervous as you to jump in.
Gain insights with exclusive conversations from real estate professionals about buying, selling and investing across Australia.
And we are in Engadine talking to Brad. What about the spring? Spring always seems to come a little bit earlier. Do you find that, like the spring season is changing?
Particularly this year, we've seen spring start a little early, not in terms of the weather, but in terms of the type of inquiry that we're seeing from homeowners looking to potentially start to sell their properties. In the Sutherland Shire, the traditional spring selling season has been fairly common over the last decade or so, where most homes would wait until the weather warms up and gardens can look better to get their properties onto the market. But we're definitely seeing an increase in available stock. Our business is up 17.1% on the same time last year in terms of available listings. Across the market though, particularly for Engadine, the 2233 postcode, we haven't seen the same volume of increase, but the amount of engagement and conversations that our sales team are having with potential sellers is absolutely increasing.
And what about first-time home buyers? What's happening in that space for you?
The first home buyers are a predominant sector of our buyer inquiry based on that perception of value that we spoke about earlier. And so with an increase in first home buyer activity, we're certainly seeing first home buyers out in droves. The other category of purchasers that we see focusing their search on our location is also people who are upsizing from apartments, for example. So they may have already purchased their first property and they're looking to get their hands on, a freestanding home or a more contemporary duplex in this area based on its perception of value. That sector of the market is certainly a large factor. What we've also witnessed as well is with the increase in investor borrowing. So we've now got the amount of investors borrowing money outstripping owner-occupiers, is that investor inquiry is also starting to increase fairly substantially.
Now, you run a lot of auctions there, a bit of an auction market. Anything changed around the auction registration? Have you got good numbers coming through?
We still have good numbers, but one thing that we've noted is that the number of registered bidders is starting to decrease per auction. So we keep averages of that. At the moment, our average is sitting at about 2.3 registered bidders per auction. And that's come down from as high as 6 or 7 much earlier in the year. I think the underlying tone with, some of the observations that market commentators are making with regards to the increase in available stock level is that real estate is like any other marketplace or any other commodity. It's supply and demand driven. And we've been witnessing significantly low levels of supply, well below historical averages for the preceding 3 years, coupled with an owner-occupier-led recovery. And what that ties into at the moment, though, is with the increase in available stock and demand being still healthy and still very strong, we're starting to see buyers become a little bit more selective and just starting to enjoy a little bit more freedom and potentially some reintroduction of some of the fundamental considerations that they were looking for in houses that previously they were prepared to forego for the purpose of just buying something.
I just want to come back to the auctions. A lot of people don't put their hands up until we reach that on the market, that voice from the auctioneer. Property is now on the market. It is now selling. So many people just don't want to engage with any form of bidding until it reaches on the market status. Is that in your experience, because I know that you're an auctioneer, is that a good strategy? What do you think?
Look, from a purchasing perspective, if I'm offering advice to people looking to buy, the objective for any auction would be to ideally shut down that auction process as quickly as possible, because the more time that people bid or the more times that they choose to bid, the more confidence that they create for themselves. And all of a sudden, bidding isn't necessarily about how much money I'm parting with, it's just the concept of bidding. And so the quicker you can actually shut that auction process down, which means bidding with more enthusiasm and with more aggression toward the top end of your budget, the likelihood is you're actually going to start to slow down your competition Whereas I've seen auctions where people have bid $1,000 bid increments, and that's happened 100 times, and you've got $100,000 worth of price increase. All of a sudden, everybody's confidence to participate increases. The purpose of a reserve for an auction is the limit at which the vendor sets the property is going to be sold. Auctioneers don't need to announce by legislation the property is on the market. So the objective is, if you want to buy that home, you should be able to go there and be bidding with confidence, with the objective of winding that auction process up as quickly as you can to remove the confidence from your competition. And the advantage of that auction process is it's transparent. You can see exactly who your competition are, who you're competing with, and the goal should be trying to get that squared away as quickly as possible so that you're not encouraging more participation from other potential purchasers.
And I think another way of looking at it too is if you drop 50K down, I mean you're making a massive statement, but it's not like you drop 50 on it or 25, suddenly you win the property. I think a lot of people go, oh, I actually paid too much for it. But all you're doing is you're saving those increments, by $5,000, $2,000, whatever it is, up and up and up and up and up. And soon $25,000, $50,000 goes by. But the illusion is that, it's over. Yeah, it's too expensive for me.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people don't take the psychology and the emotion involved in buying a home as seriously as they do, particularly when we're talking about sort of, the observations surrounding the marketplace and everything's data driven. But purchasing a home is a very emotional experience, particularly for owner occupiers, but even investors. The concept of buying a property is highly emotional. You're 100% correct. That objective of that first initial bid being $25,000 or $50,000 above, your competitor, it may feel daunting, but to your point, sidelining the emotional journey for the rest of those potential purchases possibly saves you additional money. Because as I said before, with that previous example, I've seen auctions increase by $100,000 with $1,000 bids. Using that same case study, if one of those purchasers had have increased their initial bid by $50,000, the likelihood is their competition probably wouldn't have wanted to participate or continue, because the gap between where they are and where they need to be, that's a $50,000 consideration as opposed to just a $1,000 bid. There's a lot of fundamentals to consider, but taking into account the emotion attached and the psychology surrounding that for the people that you're competing with is an important factor when you're bidding an auction.
It is a great point that you have made, a great way to wind things up. And thanks so much for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast. Engadine, I think we've learnt a trick or two about your location. Thanks, Brad.
Absolute pleasure, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Ready to step up your property knowledge? Access powerful insights with us.
Millennials, you see them talking about buying their forever homes. I just wonder how much of a factor the mum and dad bank is playing here.
Well, we've called it the property ladder for a reason. Normally, people started the Aussie dream at the bottom rung and worked their way up over time. Maybe it was a unit in a place a little bit away from their ideal suburb, but hey, that's where they started, the one-bedders, the two-bedders, and moved on up through the property cycle over time. But yes, you are getting a generation that has a bit more of a focus on lifestyle, that probably aren't wanting to compromise as much. In fact, we found in our research that some of them expect to start their economic life in the manner in which they've seen their parents finish their economic life.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.